I was today years old when I found out.
In the rolling hills of Lynchburg, Tennessee, lies a story both extraordinary and nearly forgotten. It's the tale of Nathan Nearest Green, the first known African-American master distiller, whose legacy was hidden in the shadows of history for far too long. Born around 1820 in Maryland, Nearest's early life is shrouded in mystery, but by the mid-1800s, he found himself working on the farm of a country preacher and distiller in Lincoln County. Nearest had a gift for distilling, mastering a unique technique known as sugar maple charcoal filtering. This method, believed to have been brought over by slaves from West Africa, gave his whiskey an unmatched smoothness. It was the Lincoln County process, a hallmark of what would become Tennessee whiskey. In the mid-1850s, a young white boy came to work on the same farm. This boy, the 10th child of his family, had lost his mother at just 4 months old and sought solace and purpose away from home. He toiled as a chore boy, performing menial tasks like milking cows and fetching water. Yet, his curiosity was piqued by the smoke rising from the hollow on the vast property, where men hurried with mules and wagons. Eventually, the preacher took the boy to meet the source of the smoke, Nearest Green. Introducing him as the best whiskey maker I know of, the preacher asked Nearest to teach the boy everything about distilling, especially his prized sugar maple charcoal filtering process. This process was what separated Tennessee whiskey from bourbon, a subtle but significant difference that Nearest had perfected. Under Nearest's mentorship, the boy learned the art of distilling. As he grew, he began to sell the unique whiskey, even during the Civil War. His knack for sales and entrepreneurship soon made the whiskey popular in the region. By the age of 15, the boy was an orphan, having lost his father during the war. He decided to dedicate his life to the whiskey business. After the Civil War, with Nearest now a free man, the young entrepreneur partnered with the preacher to run the distillery. Eventually, he bought out the preacher's share and named the distillery after himself. He honored Nearest by making him the first master distiller of his newly named operation, an extraordinary move in a time and place where such recognition was rare for an African-American man. As the business grew, the young man moved his operations to a new location. Although Nearest retired, his legacy continued through his sons, Louis, Eli, and George, who worked at the new distillery, along with his grandsons, Charlie and Ott. The young chore boy who had become a brilliant businessman would go on to become one of the most famous whiskey makers in the world. His name, Jasper Newton, but in Lynchburg, he was known as Uncle Jack, and to the rest of the world, Jack Daniel. For years, the story of Nearest Green, the master distiller who played a crucial role in the success of Jack Daniel's whiskey, was lost in time. But now, as we rediscover this remarkable tale, we can share it and ensure that Uncle Nearest receives the recognition he so richly deserves. His story is one of skill, mentorship, and legacy, a narrative that should be celebrated for generations to come.
Now this is a story all
Babani Sissoko.
In the scorching summer of August 1995, a man named Babani Sissoko strolled into the Dubai Islamic Bank, seeking a car loan. Sissoko had recently arrived from his native Mali, prior to this fateful day. He requested to meet with the bank manager and was fobbed off, but it appears Sissoko's persistence paid off, as following several hours of pleading, the bank manager finally agreed to meet with him. The bank manager, Mohammed Ayub, was entranced by Sissoko's charismatic charm. It was this charm that landed Sissoko the loan he was seeking, although he had no employment or means to repay the loan. Despite that, a deal was done and Sissoko invited the bank manager to a restaurant where he promised to show him something that would blow his mind. Intrigued by this proposal and against his better judgment, Mohammed took up the offer. This is where things took a turn as Sissoko spun a tale of magic and promise, claiming he could double any sum of money with his supernatural powers, despite the taboo of black magic in Islam. Ayub couldn't resist the allure of untold riches, and so began a fateful dance of deception and illusion. With each visit to Sissoko's humble home, Ayub witnessed a spectacle of lights and whispers, convinced of the man's mystical abilities. Little did he know, behind the smoke and mirrors lay a cunning scheme. Ayub began making weekly deposits into Sissoko's account, with the majority of the transactions exceeding $1 million. Although Sissoko was no longer doubling the money given to him, Ayub was continuing to make weekly deposits into Sissoko's account. Whatever he experienced at Sissoko's home had left Ayub completely convinced of Sissoko's powers. In November 1995, only weeks after putting on the magic display for Mohammed Ayub, Sissoko visited another bank in New York, and did much more than open an account. He walked into Citibank one day, no appointment, met a teller, and he ended up marrying her, and there's reason to believe she made his relationship with Citibank more comfortable, and he ended up opening an account there through which more than $100 million was wire transferred into the United States. Sissoko paid his new wife more than $500,000 for her help. With the bank's money rolling in, Sissoko could fulfill his dream of opening an airline for West Africa. He bought a used Hawker Siddeley 125 and a pair of old Boeing 727s. This was the birth of Air Dabia, named after his village in Mali. All throughout this time, Ayub was still diligently sending Sissoko his weekly transfer of $1 million+. But in July 1996, Sissoko made a serious mistake as he tried to buy 2 Huey helicopters dating from the Vietnam War, for reasons that remain unclear. Because they could be refitted as gunships, the helicopters needed a special export license. Sissoko's men tried to speed things up by offering a $30,000 bribe to a customs officer. Instead, they got themselves arrested, and Interpol issued a warrant for Sissoko's arrest too. He was caught in Geneva, where he'd gone to open another bank account. Sissoko was quickly extradited to the US, where he started to mobilize influential supporters. The US government wanted Sissoko held in custody, but he was bailed for $20 million, a Florida record at the time. He then went on a spending spree. His defense team was rewarded with Mercedes or Jaguar cars. But that was just the start. Sissoko spent $500,000 in one jewelry store alone and hundreds of thousands in others. In one men's clothing store he spent more than $150,000. Sissoko became a Miami celebrity. He already had several wives, but that didn't stop him marrying more, and housing them in some of the 23 apartments he rented in the city. Despite this PR drive, when Sissoko's case came to court he disregarded his lawyer's advice and pleaded guilty. Maybe he calculated that this would provoke fewer questions about his finances. The sentence was 43 days in prison and a $250,000 fine, paid, of course, by the Dubai Islamic Bank, though without its knowledge. After serving only half this sentence, he was given early release in return for a $1 million payment to a homeless shelter. The rest he was meant to serve under house arrest. Instead he returned home to a hero's welcome. As the truth came to light, Ayub faced the harsh reality of betrayal. With millions vanished and reputations tarnished, justice sought its reckoning. Ayub confessed to a colleague, who asked how much was missing. Too ashamed to say, Ayub wrote it on a scrap of paper: 890 million dirhams, the equivalent of $242 million or £175 million. He was found guilty of fraud and given 3 years in jail. It's rumored he was also forced to undergo an exorcism, to cure him of his belief in black magic. For 12 years, between 2002 and 2014, Sissoko was a member of parliament in Mali, which gave him immunity from prosecution. No longer an MP, he has been protected by the fact that Mali has no extradition treaty with any other country. When asked about the money, Sissoko stated, "The gentleman from the bank should explain how they lost all that money. I mean the $242 million. Listen, how could that money have left the bank the way it did? That's the problem. It's not Ayub alone who authorizes the transfers."
I was today years old when I found out.
Here's a story you've probably never heard. This is the story of Elvita Adams. On December 2, 1979, Elvita Adams took the fateful decision to unalive herself. After losing her job, the 29-year-old Bronx woman was reportedly living off $100 welfare checks. Unable to pay the rent, her landlord was threatening to evict her and her 10-year-old son. So in a deep depression and not knowing what to do, she found herself on top of the Empire State Building. The 102-story Midtown Manhattan building, completed in 1931, is internationally recognized. With a height of 1,250 feet, Elvita Adams wasn't the first person who decided to leap from the Empire State Building. There have been over 30 self-unaliving attempts from the famous New York City skyscraper, with most of them being successful. The first one happened in 1931 before the building was even complete, when a man who had been fired jumped from the 58th floor. There was also the tragic story of Evelyn McHale, whose death was dubbed the most beautiful self-unaliving because she wore pearls and gloves and landed atop a limousine. A photography student snapped a photo of McHale's 1947 jump, which then became infamous, ending up in Time magazine and even in Andy Warhol's art. But Elvita Adams' incident wouldn't be remembered because it was the first one or the most beautiful one. It would be remembered because, despite the jump, it didn't happen at all. On that Sunday evening in early December, Adams had wandered over from the Bronx to Manhattan to see the lights. "They were so pretty, I wanted to reach out and touch them," she is quoted as saying afterwards. Adams climbed over the fence that surrounded the observational platform on the building's 86th floor and leapt. But she'd never find death as something incredible happened. Wind isn't ordinarily thought of as miraculous, but the gust of wind that blew Elvita Adams' body back, landing her just one flight down, was nothing short of extraordinary. On that day, the winds were said to be blowing somewhere between 23 and 38 miles per hour. After jumping, Adams landed on a 2.5-foot ledge on the 85th floor. Reportedly, security guard Frank Clark heard Adams moaning and reached out of the floor's window to pull her into safety. She was then taken to Bellevue Hospital in severe pain, the result of either a broken hip or pelvis. After being treated, she was placed under psychiatric watch, while a hospital spokesperson said she was in satisfactory condition. After the fall, Elvita Adams allegedly said from the hospital, "All I remember is the pain. I was in so much pain that I wasn't afraid." She is also quoted as saying, "I'm not sure if the wind pushed me back or pushed me off."
I was today years old when I found out.
George Edwin Taylor was a man of extraordinary character and vision, whose life story is one of perseverance and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Born in 1857 in Little Rock, Arkansas, to a father who was a slave and a mother who was a free woman of color, Taylor grew up in a world that was hostile to his very existence. Yet, he was a man who refused to be held back by his circumstances. As a young man, Taylor moved to Wisconsin, where he became a skilled laborer and joined the burgeoning labor movement of the late 19th century. He was an active member of the Knights of Labor, a union that fought for better working conditions and higher wages for workers of all races and backgrounds. He was also a gifted speaker and organizer, who quickly rose through the ranks of the labor movement and became a leader in the fight for workers' rights. In 1904, Taylor made history when he became the first African American to run for President of the United States. His campaign was a long shot from the start, but Taylor believed that he had a message that needed to be heard. He ran on a platform of social justice, advocating for the rights of workers, women, and minorities. He also spoke out against imperialism and the growing militarism of the United States, calling for a more peaceful and equitable world order. Despite facing intense opposition from the white establishment, Taylor's campaign was remarkably successful. He traveled the country, speaking to large crowds of supporters and winning over many voters with his powerful message. He even secured the nomination of the National Negro Liberty Party, a small but influential political organization that was dedicated to advancing the cause of civil rights. However, Taylor ultimately lost the election to Republican incumbent Theodore Roosevelt. Many factors contributed to his defeat, including widespread voter suppression, a lack of financial support, and the general hostility of the political establishment toward his candidacy. But despite this setback, Taylor remained committed to his vision of a more just and equitable society. In the years that followed, Taylor continued to be an important voice in the struggle for civil rights and social justice. He worked as a journalist and editor and remained active in the labor movement. He also continued to advocate for the rights of African Americans, women, and workers, and remained a staunch opponent of war and imperialism. Today, George Edwin Taylor is remembered as a pioneering figure in American history, who challenged the status quo and fought for a more inclusive and democratic society. His legacy is a reminder of the power of individual courage and determination, and of the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming opposition.
I was today years old when I found out.
The story of Sarah Rector's life is truly captivating, and I'm excited to share it with you. Sarah Rector was a young African-American girl who was born in 1902 in Indian Territory, which is now known as Oklahoma. Her parents were freedmen who had been enslaved by Native Americans. In 1907, oil was discovered on the land that Sarah's parents had inherited from her grandfather, who was a Creek freedman. The oil discovery made Sarah one of the richest African-American children in the world. Sarah's sudden wealth made her a target of discrimination and racism, and she was often referred to by the media as the richest colored girl in the world. Sarah Rector studied at a boarding school called the Children's Industrial School in Kansas City, Missouri. The school was founded by Lucy Wortham James and provided a high-quality education to African-American children who otherwise would not have had access to it. The school offered a curriculum that emphasized vocational training and life skills. Sarah thrived at the school and was known for her intelligence and her determination to succeed. She later attended a high school in Kansas City and continued to excel academically. She became a savvy businesswoman and invested her money wisely. Sarah soon became a target of both racism and greed. Some white men trying to court her for her wealth, hoping to marry her. However, Sarah's parents were vigilant in protecting her and empowered her to make her own decisions. In 1914, she was declared white by the federal government in order to seize her land and mineral rights. Sarah fought back and won the case, becoming one of the few to successfully challenge the one-drop rule of racial categorization. Regarding her lifestyle, Sarah Rector's wealth allowed her to enjoy a life of luxury. She owned several cars, including a Rolls-Royce and a limousine, a diamond-studded watch, and she lived in a large mansion with her family in Kansas City, Missouri. The mansion was known for its opulence, with a ballroom, a swimming pool, and a movie theater. Despite her wealth, however, Sarah remained humble and grounded. She was married twice and had several children, and she continued to be involved in the community and charitable causes throughout her life. Sarah Rector died in 1967 at the age of 64. Sarah Rector's life was one of incredible wealth, perseverance, and philanthropy. Despite facing discrimination and racism, she never let that stop her from achieving her goals and using her wealth to make a positive impact in the world. Her story is a true inspiration and a testament to the power of hard work and determination.
I was today years old when I found out.
Robert Smalls was born into enslavement on April 5, 1839 in Beaufort, South Carolina. But by the age of 25, he'd schemed a way to freedom for himself and 15 other enslaved people by stealing a Confederate ship. Smalls was already forcibly working on a ship called the Planter when the Civil War began, and the vessel's owner leased it to the Confederacy. He was kept on the crew and worked closely with the ship's captain. But little did the commander know that Smalls was studying his every move. By 1862, the Union Navy had blockaded all major southern ports. Smalls realized that delivering the Planter to the fleet of Union ships located outside the Charleston harbor meant gaining his freedom, if he could make it there. So he spent his time learning the coded signals he would need in order to make it past Confederate checkpoints. On the night of May 12, 1862, after the white crew went ashore, Smalls, with the help of his fellow enslaved crew members, commandeered the ship. With Smalls at the helm, the men sailed the ship to pick up their families, who were waiting to board the ship. Dressed in the captain's hat and clothes and mimicking his mannerisms, Smalls sailed the Planter past Confederate forts toward Union territory. With his in-depth knowledge of Navy signals and the Confederate flag flying high, no one suspected a thing. And by the time the Confederacy sounded the alarm, it was too late. But now, Smalls and the other passengers had to surrender the ship to the U.S. Navy without being attacked. Realizing that the Confederate flag was still hoisted as they approached the Union ships, the men quickly replaced it with a white bedsheet, signaling the surrender of their ship. Smalls had successfully sailed the 16 people aboard the Planter from enslavement to freedom. But he didn't stop there. The story of Smalls' escape earned him respect across the North and infamy throughout the South. He was reportedly awarded $1,500 by Congress for his daring escape, estimated to be approximately half the price of the Planter, while Confederate forces reportedly placed a $4,000 bounty on his head. The Planter became a Union Navy troop transport ship, and Smalls was named captain, making him the first black person in the U.S. Navy to be given the title. Captain Smalls also commanded an ironclad vessel called Keokuk, during which time he used his knowledge of Confederate mines and movements to aid Union war efforts. After the rebel South fell to Northern forces, Captain Smalls returned to Beaufort, South Carolina with his family and purchased the home in which he and his mother were once enslaved. In 1867, he helped establish a school for black children and served on the county's school board. His advocacy for equitable public education made him a prominent political figure in his community during the Reconstruction era. And in 1868, he was elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives. He also later served in the state Senate. In 1874, Smalls was elected to the U.S. Congress and served in the U.S. House of Representatives for more than a decade.
I was today years old when I found out.
So today, I am going to talk to you about an important figure in Argentine history. Maria Remedios del Valle, also known as the Madre de la Patria. Maria Remedios del Valle was an Afro-Argentine camp follower turned soldier who participated in the Argentine War of Independence. She was a dedicated and brave fighter, and she suffered greatly during the war. She was wounded in battle, captured, imprisoned, and even escaped. Tragically, she lost her entire family during the conflict. When the war finally came to an end, Maria Remedios del Valle returned to Buenos Aires. She was left with nothing, and she was forced to beg for her survival. Fortunately, she was eventually discovered by one of the generals under whom she had fought. Recognizing her contributions to the cause of independence, the general helped her to secure a pension that allowed her to live out the last decade of her life in relative comfort. For many years, Maria Remedios del Valle was largely forgotten. It was not until the turn of the 21st century that Argentine historians began to recognize and celebrate the contributions of black Argentines like her. Today, she is widely regarded as a hero and an important figure in the history of Argentina. In fact, the Argentine legislature has declared the 8th of November as the National Day of Afro-Argentines and African Culture in her honor. In conclusion, Maria Remedios del Valle was a brave and dedicated soldier who made significant contributions to the Argentine War of Independence. Despite the many challenges and hardships she faced, she remained steadfast and committed to the cause of freedom. She is a true hero and an inspiration to us all. Thank you.
I was today years old when I found out.
Honduras and Guatemala share the Garifuna culture, which has a distinct and unique history. Garifuna history begins in 1635, when a Spanish ship from Nigeria sinks near the island of San Vicente. These castaway Africans mix with the natives, called Caribs and Arawak. This was the birth of the Garifuna people, indigenous Africans who were free in desolate areas. Their chief, Joseph Chatoyer, and his wife Barauda were Garifuna leaders.
Joseph Chatoyer era el líder Garifuna en San Vicente. Él es la persona que lideró la lucha contra los ingleses. Supuestamente los franceses eran los que apoyaban a los Garifuna. Pero llegó un momento donde los franceses vendieron esa confianza a los ingleses. Y fue así como lograron expulsar a nuestros antepasados de allá. Él no fue un líder garífuna en Centroamérica, pero la lucha que hizo en la isla de San Vicente, en todas las comunidades garífunas se reconocen.
On February 20th, 1797, over 5,000 Garinagu exiled from San Vicente to escape English rule. Only half of them made it to the island of Roatán, today known as Honduras. From there, the Garifuna people settled along the coast of Honduras, all the way from the town of Trujillo to the village of Masca.
Nos vinieron a dejar en las costas nortes, de Honduras, porque aquí no se podía vivir, había muchas plagas y todas esas cosas, y los únicos que podían resistir eso eran los afrodescendientes. Desde entonces estamos aquí nosotros luchando.
The Garifuna people migrated to the countries of Belize, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua, and to the towns of Livingston and Puerto Barrios in Guatemala. Today, there are about 45 Garifuna villages in Central America.
I was today years old when I found out.
You want to see your great grandfather? Okay, here he comes. And
Oh, right.
what do you think?
It's remarkable, isn't it? I think there is probably some resemblance. But yes, I think that's. I think there are certainly other members in my family who he bears a resemblance to. Yes, some of my cousins. Yes.
It was found in Goff's Cave in Cheddar Gorge in Somerset in 1903. Cheddar Man has long been believed to be the oldest known complete skeleton from a time when humans came to live in Britain permanently. And it's long been assumed he's as white as cheddar. Here's a previous reconstruction of his face. But now Cheddar Man's DNA has revealed he looked very different indeed. That's right, the first resident Britons were black, with blue eyes and wavy hair. Researchers had an inkling that our ancestors were darker skinned than we were, but they had no idea that some of them could be this dark. And for those of us who identify as being white British, it's now reasonable to ask, well, what does that actually mean, given at least 10% of our ancestry is shared with this group of people?
It was a surprise just how dark the pigmentation is for Cheddar Man. This was actually incredibly dark-skinned, so it's really interesting for us as scientists to sort of be pinpointing when these kind of things happened. But what we've actually seen is that these darker pigmentations were actually surviving in these colder climes for a lot longer than we had anticipated, probably to do with diet.
Cheddar Man's ancestors left Africa about 40,000 years ago. At this time, much of northern Europe, including Britain, was being covered in ice. Around 10,000 years ago, the ice retreated, but what we now call Britain was connected to the continent by a land bridge called Doggerland. It was across that Cheddar Man's ancestors colonised Britain. There's been people here ever since. We now know Cheddar Man belonged to a group called the Western Hunter-Gatherers, who arrived here before Neolithic people brought farming to Britain about 6,000 years ago.
1, 2, 3, come on!
The new data allowed Dutch twins Ari and Alphonse Kennis to reconstruct Cheddar Man's face.
I was today years old when I found out.
Archaeologists have revealed the remains of what they say was a high-status woman of African origin who lived in York during Roman times. Academics say the discovery goes against the common assumption that all Africans in Roman Britain were low-status male slaves. Remains of the Ivory Bangle lady, as she has been named, were studied in reading using forensic techniques. She was first discovered in the Bootham area of York in August 1901. Her remains were in a stone coffin near Sycamore Terrace in the city. Her grave dates back to the second half of the 4th century. She was buried with items including jet and elephant ivory bracelets, earrings, beads, and a blue glass jug. She also had a rectangular piece of bone, which is thought to have originally been mounted in a wooden box, which was carved to read, "Hail, sister, may you live in God." The grave goods and skeletal remains of the Ivory Bangle lady were studied by the Archaeology Department of the University of Reading. The university's Dr. Hella Eckhart said a study of the skull's size and facial features, along with analysis of the chemical signature of the food and drink she had consumed, led to their conclusion that she was of high status and of African origin. Dr. Eckhart said, "Multicultural Britain is not just a phenomenon of more modern times. Analysis of the Ivory Bangle lady and others like her contradicts common popular assumptions about the makeup of Roman British populations, as well as the view that African immigrants in Roman Britain were of low status, male, and likely to have been slaves." Professor Mary Beard, a leading classicist, was attacked on social media when she confirmed that there had been black Romans in Britain. She used the Ivory Bangle lady as crucial evidence. It is astonishing that there is still a need to debate over facts that were irrefutably proven 100 years ago. We have proof of dinosaurs walking our Earth, and the evidence of their existence is far older than ancient Rome. One can only assume that people cannot accept diversity has always existed in this country, purely because of their own prejudice. The subsequent discovery of Beachy Head Lady and all the black Roman bodies we haven't yet found form part of our rich British history. It would be undeniably beneficial for the general public if we can all agree that, as was so rightfully put by David Olusoga, black people have had a presence in our history for centuries. Get over it.
Bye.